So let me introduce our speaker tonight. This is William Douros. And William Douros will be speaking on Yosemite's in the Sea, how America protects its national marine sanctuary. William Douros is the West Coast Regional Director for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. So we just went out to dinner, and I asked him if that meant whether he was a king of the ocean. And he said no, he's king of like most of the oceans. Because it doesn't include all of it, like 12 miles out. So it's like here's Neptune going to talk to you about how he protects the oceans for us. NOAA, which is a part of the federal government, is what is NOAA? NOAA understands and predicts changes in the Earth's environment from the depths of the ocean to the surface of the sun. That's more than the Earth. Okay. And it conserves and manages our coastal and marine resources. Prior to his present position, Douros was superintendent, it's one level like beneath king, of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. William Douros is a graduate of the University of California in Santa Barbara with degrees in environmental biology and a master's in marine biology. So welcome.
I never agreed that I was a king of anything, but I did, one of the things I grabbed on my way out of the office was a map, because I was coming to a map event, right? And so, Bill, I've got for you a map of these little serfdoms, pun intended, here on the West Coast. So here's a map of the National Marine Sanctuary System, and if others want a copy, we can try to get you copies of those too. But that's, yeah, I knew it was a map event, so I had to bring a map. Boy, I'm amazed at the turnout. I really appreciate all you guys coming tonight. So as Bill said, I work for the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and that's a federal agency that's been established for 30, 40 years now to manage the Yosemites of the sea. I bet everybody here knows what Yosemite looks like, right? You guys have all probably been to your backyard park, which is one of the most famous in the world, one of the best protected places in the world. Just down the road is Sequoia National Park as well, probably one that many of you have been to, and I think everyone's probably familiar with the Grand Canyon as well, right? And it's a national park. These are iconic, significant, special places that America has set aside for lots of reasons, but predominantly for the conservation value and the opportunity that we all have to get out and get in those parks and enjoy them and hike and sometimes fish, take photographs. But there's a comparable system as well. And I'm going to talk to you about this tonight. And it's called the National Marine Sanctuary System. And this shows those places around the country. So you can see in the upper right in the northeast, there are 3 sanctuaries there. Thunder Bay is in the Great Lakes. So we can have national marine sanctuaries in the Great Lakes. And Thunder Bay is the only one that's there now, and it protects a whole host of shipwrecks that are in Lake Huron. Stellwagen Bank is in the offshore waters off New England. A really rich whale ground, breeding and calving ground, they call it, and feeding area, but also a very important fish area, fisheries. Monitor was the first marine sanctuary designated. Does anybody here heard of the Monitor? Right? Probably the old timers raising their hands, right? Because they learned about it in U.S. history. The Monitor was the first ironclad ship that the U.S. Navy ever had, and it was instrumental in the North winning the Civil War. It sunk in a hurricane off the North Carolina, Virginia coast, and it was the first marine sanctuary that was designated. Gray's Reef is off the coast of Georgia. Florida Keys, probably a lot of people have heard of the Florida Keys and maybe even been there, here from Modesto. It's a large area that includes coral reefs and mangrove areas, a lot of shipwrecks there as well. And then Flower Garden Banks is off Texas. and it protects some salt domes that are in the waters off Texas and coral on top of them as well. I'll come to the West Coast in a minute, but in the Pacific Islands, the National Marine Sanctuary of American Samoa, it was recently renamed and expanded. That's in American Samoa. Humpback Whale Sanctuary is one that surrounds many of the Hawaiian Islands. It's designated to protect habitat for humpback whales. And then the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, I didn't get the new name up there, but I finally got it down. It's called Papahanaumokuakea, right? And it's spelled just like it sounds. And so that's the biggest of these marine protected areas that we manage as part of the National Marine Sanctuary System. It's about 120,000 square miles. That's really all the waters northwest of Kauai. And then here on the West Coast, and I'll talk more about these, give you a little more detail, because the West Coast is the area that I'm responsible for. There are 5 sites: Olympic Coast, which is off the Washington coast. Cordell Bank and Gulf of the Farallones are off San Francisco. Monterey Bay, which is due west of here. And I'll show you again more of that, and Channel Islands. And so I'll focus by and large on these sites on the West Coast. And I want to give you a lot of examples of what it is that we do in managing these places to really make it relevant so you can appreciate what that's about. There'll be a little bit of science in here, but hopefully it'll be stimulation for your head and also some stimulation for your heart. Because there's some pretty cool things that go on in national marine sanctuaries. A lot of it people know about, but even more of it people don't know about because it happens below the water. And I often talk to my friends in the Park Service and sort of tease them about how much easier they have it, because when you go to a park, by and large, you can see the park in front of you. You can hike on the trail and the wildlife is around you. But also they have a gate as well, right? To get into the park, you got to go through the gate. They can hand you a little map or a brochure and tell you what's going on, what's new in the park. In a national marine sanctuary in an ocean area, it's wide open. And we don't have a gate that people go through, and it's a lot of that activity is on or below the surface. And so it creates more challenges for us than the folks in the Park Service have, the land-based side of the Park Service. But there are ways in which these are much different and in some ways more special in terms of how we go about addressing issues. So let me just give you a quick tour of this. This is Cordell Bank. So that's this area here, and here's San Francisco. You guys are, we're right about over here somewhere right now. And so what makes Cordell Bank special is the top of the bank here is about 100 feet deep. So it was not that long ago when that was an island adjacent to the Farallon Islands, and these rocky reefs are full of fish, full of invertebrates like these colonial anemones that form and grow in the area. It's also an aggregation point for albatross. This albatross has probably flown over from Hawaii, from the Hawaiian Islands. And there's some fantastic stories that I'll talk about in a bit more about migrations. But it's an important feeding area also for blue whales right there off the coast of San Francisco. So this is the only national marine sanctuary on the West Coast that doesn't come to shore. Right? All the rest come to shore. And the shoreline creates considerably more challenges. So a little bit further south is Gulf of the Farallones. Again, San Francisco's up there. And these are the Farallon Islands that are off San Francisco on a clear day, which is rare, but clear day you can see those islands. And what makes this area special as well, I should say the coastline includes wetlands like Tamales Bay and Estero Americano, 4 other esteros. It's a huge seabird and shorebird aggregation area, both for breeding and for feeding. It's also along the islands in particular, and off Point Reyes, we get these big aggregations of seals, elephant seals, and significantly that always brings in white sharks. And the white shark population, there's really 3 populations in the world. So one's off South Africa, another one's off Australia, and the third one is here in the Americas, so off northern Baja and central southern California. So from the Farallon Islands to Guadalupe Island is one population of white sharks. And they come to these islands and they feed aggressively on the elephant seals and the sea lions that are on those islands, as well as down off Central California too. So Monterey Bay Sanctuary stretches from San Francisco down through Monterey Bay along the Big Sur coast to Cambria. And it includes this seamount, Davidson Seamount, which we added recently after it was designated in 1992. Some real, beautiful shorelines and scenic coast, but that canyon in the center and other parts like the seamount attract a lot of these pelagic animals to the area. So like these jellyfish, a lot of pinnipeds there, sea lions, elephant seals, fur seals. We get dolphins and whales, 33 species of cetaceans in that area. Come to this area. This is a leatherback sea turtle. Right, these animals have been around for about 200 million years, and they're one of these perilous species kind of at risk in the world, but they are born on beaches in Indonesia, and throughout their adult life, they're going back and forth from Indonesia, so across the Pacific, to Central California to feed on this thing that no one else wants to even get near, these jellyfish. And they gorge on those jellyfish, and they swim all the way back to the Pacific and climb up on the beach and lay their eggs, and then start another 2-year cycle coming to the west coast and back. And it's one of many species, and I'll show you some data about what that is like for the species that come there. This is called a flytrap anemone. Looks just like a Venus flytrap, doesn't it? These live on, we find these on the top of this seamount, right? And they're an anemone that when something falls in it, they close up, just like a Venus flytrap on land. And then this sanctuary is also one that gets quite a bit of recreational activity, like these surfers in Santa Cruz and swimmers, kayakers, and recreational fishermen as well. And then the last one I'll talk about just from the California sanctuaries is Channel Islands. Santa Barbara's at the top, Ventura's over here, and there are these 5 northern Channel Islands, big dramatic coastlines as part of that sanctuary, some enormous kelp forests, some of the best scuba diving in the world takes place here at the Channel Islands. Includes the California marine fish, the state marine fish, right? There's the Garibaldi, looks like a great big goldfish. But they're common in these islands, but it's kind of the northern extent of their range. White abalone. This is the first listed marine species, invertebrate species, and it's, again, another species that could be going extinct, though there's some real promise showing in the recovery, but this is the northern range for white abalone. And then they too, at this sanctuary here on the west end of San Miguel in particular, have enormous colonies of pinnipeds that are there. So harbor seals, sea lions, California sea lions, stellar sea lions, northern fur seals, and elephant seals are found around these islands. And now even sea otters are starting to repopulate these islands. So big beaches in that area. And one thing that we've helped with there is to help the Chumash Indians to promote their culture, and that has included rebuilding a canoe and then using that canoe to paddle back and forth to the islands, which is what they used to do predominantly in their culture. So this is just a sweep, just a quick snapshot of what goes on at these sanctuaries, why they're designated, and why they're significant. Because these are the top 14 marine areas in the world, in the country, are these marine sanctuaries. And so we get a lot of questions about, what is a national marine sanctuary? How is it that I would know a marine sanctuary, and what does it mean? So these are place-based areas where the U.S. government invests in science, education, and resource protection. We do provide benefits and help to coastal economies by promoting tourism and coastal recreation inside the marine sanctuaries themselves. We work in collaboration with many other ocean partners, other agencies. This notion, as I mentioned, that there's a collaborative approach to ocean conservation. And these are not wilderness areas, perhaps most importantly. These aren't areas where we don't want people to go in, although some of the really deep waters you probably would only go in once and you never come back. It's very, very deep in some of these places. But we encourage multiple uses that are consistent with this resource protection mandate. And so the National Marine Sanctuaries Act was passed in 1972, and it directs that areas of the marine environment with special conservation, recreational, ecological, historical, cultural, archaeological, or aesthetic qualities. So any one of these can make up a sanctuary. The ones that we have today, basically, most of them meet many of these different criteria. And we've got a requirement to raise public awareness and conduct education and outreach about what's important in those areas. We improve management of the resources by conducting our own research and coordinating research that's done by others. And that science includes natural science, social science, as well as archaeological and maritime historical science. As I mentioned, helping coastal economies by promoting tourism and recreation and facilitating compatible use. So these are what are aspects of the law that was written in 72 that direct our agency to set these areas up and how to manage them. And in each of them, each of these sanctuaries, there are some real fundamental programs that you'll find: research and monitoring, education and outreach. We broadly try to address a number of resource protection issues, and frankly, they get the bulk of the attention. What are the threats, and how are we going about managing those threats? And then maritime heritage. And so I'm going to talk about some of the threats in a minute, just to give you a sense of how we go about solving these problems. So I think this is just one more slide on what sanctuaries are, because this is important. They're really designed to protect what's called the marine ecosystem, right? So the marine ecosystem is a whole suite of different habitats. So it's the rocky shore, sandy beaches, the sandy seafloor, canyons, kelp forests, a whole range of habitats, and not just one particular aspect of it. The regulations that we have and the threats are typically we're trying to address the broad known impacts, known human activities that will cause impacts into the ocean. And we're focused on the interdependence of the species that are in there. Right, so if it's like the game Jenga, right, where you're taking out little pieces. Those of you who played Jenga, right, and eventually the whole thing falls over. You can take pieces out, right? You can get by for a little ways, but you can't get by taking all the pieces out. And sometimes it falls over quicker than you thought. That's what ecosystem management's about too, right? Not losing the pieces, because you just never know how you or the rest of the resources in that system might depend on those. So it's multiple systems, multiple services, and multiple habitats. And so one of the things that Bill suggested might be worthwhile is at least just giving you a framework of what are the laws that govern this, right? Because there's a lot of public policy that goes into the designation of a marine sanctuary. At the top level is the National Marine Sanctuaries Act that was passed in 1972. It's been updated a few times. And that law requires that list of candidate sites be identified. And if new sites are to be designated, they have to come off of that list of candidate sites. When we get to the point where we have an idea of an area that ought to be designated, we go through a very elaborate public process, one that might take us 2 or 3 years to go from a concept to a suite of documents that the public can review and tell us, do they think we're right, do they think we're wrong? And you can imagine there's multiple users in that ecosystem. There's the guy that owns the kayak shop and the commercial fisherman and the oil company that wants to drill for oil out there. And we attempt to balance all of those multiple uses, but we can't, frankly, give everybody everything that they want. And that's where this public process is really critical, is how do you evaluate what one's needs are and who do you allocate those needs and the resources to. But ultimately, after that public process, there's a suite of final documents. One is what's called the Terms of Designation. And for those of you that know anything, you've been involved with local government land use planning, that's like the general plan. In general, what's the purpose for this sanctuary? And in general, what are the activities that we're really concerned about? Then there's a suite of regulated activities that you could frankly print on a single sheet of paper. What we regulate is very few, broad, and pretty straightforward. But every now and then there's a need for new regulation, but that's often our goal of last resort. Probably the main thing just to remember, you're right there. Those of you that live around here, I'm assuming most of you do. I live right here. We're all doing that. Okay, so I'm going to talk then about some of these broad scale issues and opportunities. And for the sake of time, I'm only going to grab the top three. And let me just say now, we spent a huge amount of time. I think of it as an opportunity on public education. It's a major focus of what we do, but I'm not going to talk that much about it. And we were chatting over dinner that in some ways, this alone could be several talks as part of the MAPS series about climate change and what does it mean for ocean places and what do we do differently, with these being kind of the three heads of the dragon: rising sea levels, warming oceans, and acidifying oceans. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to focus, just give you some really, what I think are some pretty cool examples of both problems that we've seen in some of these sanctuaries and the kind of solutions that we've come up with. All right, how we've tackled those. So I'll start with this first one: extensive overexploitation of natural resources. So this is a building that's actually right next to my office from the 1850s. It's in Monterey, and it's still there today, and it's called the Whaling Station. And it's not a cool, gimmicky name for marketing. They actually, from this building, they would send the crews out to go hunt whales as they'd show up in around Monterey Harbor. Another thing that is was a booming fishery in Monterey were abalone. These are red abalone, and these are the ladies that worked in the cannery. That's a pile of abalone yet to be shucked, right? You take the abalone out of the shell, and then they would chop them up and can them. And I can tell you, because this is what I did my graduate work on, this fishery that they had in Monterey for about 50, 60 years of these enormous piles of abalone. And many people lament today, oh, the abalone are gone. It's an entirely artificial fishery. It existed for those 40, 50 years because we killed all the sea otters. And the sea otters are a very voracious predator and they love abalone. And so when you take the predator out of the system, the prey can expand. And they don't really cause any harm that abalone don't. They're wonderful to eat, but the whole fishery is artificial because we killed all the sea otters. And another fishery, though, that's a very natural fishery are the sardines, which Monterey is very famous for, and the size and abundance of fisheries in Monterey. And so these are all examples of what at the time was a fantastic fishery. People made a lot of money. People got a lot of food out of them. And each one of them has a crash associated with them. And this just gives you some data of fisheries catch from 1980 to 2005, 2006, of all the ports in the San Francisco area aggregated. In red, it's by weight. In green, it's by revenue. And you can see that trend line is kind of going in the wrong direction from what people would want. This shows the fisheries in Monterey. It kind of does the exact same thing, right? Little blips here and there, but over time, over that 30 years, they're moving in the wrong direction. Same issue down in San Diego, an even bigger crash. A lot of that was tuna related. Harvesting, now some of this was due to different restrictions that went in on the kinds of gear that could be used. But frankly, a lot of it is that the fish were being caught. And it's pretty similar in Santa Barbara as well. Right? You can see that. They're all going in that direction. And frankly, that's not a good long-term sustainable direction for them to be going in. But here's another thing, and this is, I didn't have the time to actually dig up, but frankly, they don't exist. The data from lots of other species that were harvested, right? But keep in mind, this is the line that works for blue whales. When we harvested blue whales from around the 1700s to around the mid-1900s, we stopped harvesting them. Although the last whaling station, anyone know where the last whaling station is in the United States? San Francisco. You know when it shut down? Half this room was still alive when it shut down in 1983. Right? We were whaling that late. Right? But that's what the line looks like for blue whales. And then it starts going up. And to some extent, they're doing better because we've got marine sanctuaries. We're not solely in any way responsible for the recovery of blue whales. Right? That we quit harvesting them had the biggest benefit. Right? That we put in management plans under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, that a sister agency, the National Fisheries Service, is responsible for. That's had a big benefit. But so is the sanctuary. Humpback whales, same thing. You know, I'm not changing the lines. I'm just showing you that elephant seals were harvested. The story goes down to about 80 they think were left of elephant seals. In fact, they thought they were all extinct. A guy from the Smithsonian shot what he thought was the last living elephant seal because there's only one left. Might as well take it back because the Smithsonian, I guess, needed yet another elephant seal. And then they found 80 of them still alive on Guadalupe Island. And all the elephant seals that you see in these enormous populations, if you go to San Simeon or to Año Nuevo, are all from that small population. Same is true for sea otters, though, right? The story of sea otters, we thought they were all gone, and they found a raft of about 35 or 40 when they built Highway 1 down the Big Sur coast. They thought they were all gone. There was one raft of them left down near where Bixby Bridge is, that big curving bridge on the Big Sur coast. And now they're back, maybe it's a couple thousand. But they all have this very same pattern. And the same is true for common murres, where we were harvesting the eggs, right? People weren't eating common murres, but in 1849, right? What else was going on then, right? There was a big rush for the gold, and all those gold miners had to be fed. And there's fantastic stories and photographs of egg collectors going out to the Farallon Islands, and the first thing they would do was break every egg they could see. They'd camp for a couple nights and come back to the same place, and they collect all the eggs that had been relayed, right? Not relayed, a new egg was laid. You can't relay a broken egg, but the female would lay a new egg. They'd collect all those, and by hundreds of thousands of eggs, they would then ship the eggs up to the gold camps. And so the common murre population went almost to zero, and now it's back and doing well. But they all have this same pattern, right? So like those fisheries patterns, these other species also were harvested. And so this problem of extensive overexploitation is a real problem that exists, not just in our oceans. And frankly, our oceans are some of the best protected with the fishery laws that we have today that the state and the federal managers impose. But expanding protections of marine mammals and seabirds are one way you address it. Right? One way we've been addressing it. Most of these big whales and many of the birds and salmon and rockfish all depend on krill. It's a little crustacean about as big as your pinky. And I'm really proud. This is a regulation that we proposed in the Sanctuary program, that frankly there would still be the risk of harvest of krill, and some was being harvested, but we pushed forward a proposal to ban it in the sanctuaries, and the federal fishery manager said, we'll do this even better. We'll ban it all the way across the West Coast. And so this is the foundation on which all of this food web, all of these species depend on, are krill and things like squid, and now you cannot harvest krill. We've worked with fishermen and local communities to develop sustainable fisheries and sustainable waterfronts. Much of this is in their interest and their leaders on it, but we've helped stimulate that and help provide support for it. And we've also worked to develop some networks of marine protected areas at Channel Islands, helped to support the state that's established a network, and these are areas where fishing is either off limits or limited. Most take is prohibited, some things are allowed. And I'll show you an example here of a map that we're working on with some fishermen. Oh, this is that network off the Channel Islands, right? Those are the sanctuaries I showed you, the islands I showed you, and those red are areas where no one can fish. In the blue, most activities are off limits, but I think lobster can be caught there. And there's one other species, I think urchins can be caught there, can be harvested there. But the rest of these is a network that shuts down 18% of the sanctuary. We adopted it with the state of California, but it also means that 72% of the sanctuary is open to fishing. And this has been one of these issues that there was a lot of fighting and wrestling about, a lot of disagreement, but now that it's there and in place, by and large, the fishermen have adapted, and there's a tremendous amount of benefit that comes from additional resources spilling out from these marine reserves. Oh, thanks. Very timely. And so this is Monterey Bay Sanctuary, just a portion of it. And it's kind of a complex slide, but I'll just give you the gist of what you need to know. Here's Monterey Bay and the peninsula. The federal government established these areas where the hashed lines are 8 or 9 years ago that basically froze what's called the trawl footprint. It's actually the inverse of that. Trawling took place inside of this. No one was trawling here, so the federal government put trawling off limits in those areas. But common sense to a degree, but it didn't really stop new trawling, but it froze in place, for the most part, areas where no trawling was taking place. In the meantime, the state set up this network of marine protected areas, no fishing areas or limited fishing down the Big Sur coast. And what we've worked on with commercial fishermen and some environmental groups is, in some ways, a pioneering proposal that would, in the green, close areas off the trawling where they actually were trawling. But we believe these are very significant areas that ought to be protected in terms of the seafloor. But at the same time, we are proposing that the federal government, another part of the federal government, open these areas that are right now off limits to trawling. But we don't think those areas are leading to any great conservation. They're just hassling and harming fishermen. So together we've put this network proposal in front of the Pacific Fishery Management Council to close some areas and open some areas in pretty much the same proportion that would lead to, frankly, a whole new paradigm of conservation, of protecting the seafloor from trawling and other fishing activities. So we're working in collaboration with fishermen. And there was a mountain of science that just went into this alone, right? And some of it's kind of social science. Fishermen being willing to say, you know what, I've been fishing here for a very long time and I don't catch that much, but there's some pretty cool stuff and maybe you guys ought to protect that. And we had our own data for many of these places as well. And that collaborative process really bore some fruit, but it wasn't something that happened overnight. This is, in the end, the result of about 9 years worth of work. Right, that we got this nomination together, and it's going to be 3 or 4 years before it's finally adopted, assuming no one changes it. So that's 12 years to bring about this kind of a conservation package that maybe you could go and get a president to sign an executive order and it would just be done one day, and then you spend 12 years fighting with fishermen and conservationists about why it didn't do enough or it does too much. So again, that's why that process works, in my mind, really well. Okay, a couple quick things on ecosystem degradation and competing uses. So you folks know a lot about agriculture. Here on the coast, there is what we consider a pretty big agricultural community. It's about a $5 billion industry. I guess it's probably, what, twice that, 3 times that, just in this county alone. But nonetheless, it's still a huge business throughout the Salinas Valley, Santa Cruz, and parts of San Mateo. And what the sanctuary did early on was map and identify the major watersheds, leaving outside kind of the big, giant, enormous watershed, right? The San Joaquin and the Sacramento River, which also drain into the sanctuary. But these coastal major watersheds allowed us to start tackling a whole host of water quality problems in this non-regulatory fashion. And agriculture was one that we got to eventually. It was a plan that was completed in 1999, but that alone was after about 5 or 6 years of working with the ag industry. And the really interesting part about that story is we're this federal offshore agency, and we wanted to talk to the ag community about the impact that their activities have on the ocean. And yet I could certainly understand why farmers are thinking, these are the last guys I want to talk to. I got enough regulations I have to comply with. Now it's a federal resource management agency. Forget it. We're not going to talk. But over time, through some leadership, frankly, in the ag community, we found the common language, right? And the common language was the soil. Because the soil is, in essence, what the farmer depends on. And the soil was also the mechanism that was bringing pesticides and excess nitrogen into the ocean, causing problems in the ocean. And once we agreed, look, the problem, the opportunity is the soil. You want to keep it, farmers. We, the resource managers in the ocean, don't want to see it. Let's develop programs that allow the soil to stay on your farm and keep it out of the streams and into the ocean. And again, it's one of those remarkable things. The focus is on keeping the soil on the land through things like planting buffers. And farmers, at least out on the coast 10, 15 years ago, you'd see them, and for generations, they would plow the soil because it was completely black and really fine. It looked just beautiful. But it took them 7 passes with the plow, when if they did 4 passes, they would accomplish the same goal that they had to break up the soil and to get some of the plant matter back into it. And that plant matter would hold the soil together during rainstorms, right? And so we found a number of different programs like that that frankly were their ideas. And our job has been to package those up and to share them back out with other farmers. So another problem, you can see this is a giant ship going into Long Beach Harbor, and that's the biggest animal that's ever lived, right? A dead blue whale draped across the bow of that ship, right? And there's another one, right? And so this is a problem. And it's a problem for the shipping industry. It's certainly a problem for the guy that runs the harbor that now has to get that whale off. That's now going to get pretty stinky, and they're very hard to move because they're enormous. But obviously the bigger problem is for the whale population as well. And this issue, what we call whale strikes, offshore California, really took off in September 2007 at the Channel Islands, when there were 5 blue whales were struck and killed. Either they washed up on the beach, and they can do a necropsy and determine why it died. They can actually even determine if there's an impact. Did it die? Was it already dead when the boat hit it? Or did the boat strike kill it? And then we had it again in 2010 during the summer off Northern California. 6 known strikes. I think there were 4 blue whales, a humpback, and a fin whale. And some of these are really dramatic. I mean, one of the blue whales in Northern California was a pregnant female that washed up on the beach and aborted the fetus, and that got everybody fired up. And the shipping industry as well recognized we got to get involved here. This is a real and meaningful problem. And there were petitions that we needed to impose regulations that would restrict the speed limits of these ships going in and out of the harbors. And while that works, right, to a degree, some of the whales, frankly, can get out of the way. The problem with a blue whale that knows nothing that's a threat to it, when it's found a patch of food, they're just going up and down and feeding. And they are oblivious to big ships, small ships, or anything else. And so slowing them down works to a degree. But it's a big hassle, frankly, to come up with a regulation that's not going to lead to all this litigation that I mentioned with the shipping industry. They're all on tight deadlines. They don't want to go slower. They don't want to be restricted. And so we've developed a series of programs with the shipping industry that's designed to move the ships away from where the whales are. And I believe I had a slide, I forgot to put it in there. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But it reroutes the ships. When you go in and out of a harbor, big harbors like in San Francisco or Los Angeles, there are lanes that the ships have to go in. Yet those lanes go right over areas that, based on 10 years of data, we know the whales are more likely to be there. They're not always there, but they're more likely to be there. So by moving the shipping lanes a mile or 2 to the north or to the south in the Santa Barbara Channel and off San Francisco, we've dropped the risk of a strike by about 70%. We can't get it to zero, but we can bring the risk way down. In the shipping industry and the Coast Guard, took them a while to get their heads around that, but once they did, it was a winner. And the other thing that we've tried to do is to get the whale watching industry, the ships themselves, and the general public crowdsourcing whale locations, whale spotting data. And we've got apps that go on a mobile phone, and if you see a whale, you can identify, if you know the species and you're confident, identify it. Your phone knows where you are, believe it or not, and it will then record on a database where those whales are. And so if you guys are out on the coast, it's Whale Alert 2.0. Don't download it and tell us you found a whale in the San Joaquin River. We're not going to believe the data. But if you go out to the coast and you're walking on the shore and you see a whale, put that in your phone, right? Because we would take anybody's data from that. And so there's different policies that we might consider adopting, but for the most part, these are the kinds of solutions we've been looking for. And again, it's that same thing. I've said it 3 or 4 times, right? It's not a top-down regulation. It's a bottom-up collaborative approach to finding solutions. All right, I'm going to shift gears in the last 10 minutes here and give you guys a great reason why you ought to care about the ocean, right? Just 2 hours away. And I know you've all heard about the Serengeti, right? You've seen it on TV. I bet there's even someone in the room that's been there. Who's been to the Serengeti? There's 1, 2. I bet. Hey, come on, you guys got to get out of town more. Go to East Africa. Go to the Serengeti. It's an amazing place, and it's amazing because of the watering holes and the migratory pathways, right? That's what we all know about. And so, what they've got, the Serengeti, right? It's officially this area in Tanzania and Kenya. They got 5 parks together. They got enormous mammals, right? They're primary grazers. They're feeding on, near the primary productivity. Obviously, they got big predators, right? Predators chasing the grazers. They got big, dangerous reptiles. They got crocodiles and big snakes. Huge flightless birds, right? Ostriches. These famous migrations, these really rare animals, the 90 or so black rhinos that are left on Earth are in the Serengeti. There's real striking topography. Well, look, you got the same thing in Central California. You got 3 marine sanctuaries that are almost the same in size. We got great big mammals, right? They're functionally primary grazers. They're not quite eating plants, but they're eating animals way down in the food chain. We got predators, frankly, way more predators than they have. Theirs are easier to see, but orcas, killer whales, salmon, rockfish, right? We got predatory snails. We have octopus. Those are all predators. Our reptiles are harmless, right? Those giant leatherback sea turtles and our huge birds fly. And migrations are completely unknown and completely underappreciated. Yeah, we got rare animals, but we also got fish. They don't have really many fish in the Serengeti. Right? So what people want to know here are, what are the migratory pathways? What are the watering holes here in this Serengeti of the sea? And so there's a team of scientists that have been working on that, called the folks that worked on what's called tagging of Pacific pelagics, sometimes called tagging of Pacific predators. And they put satellite tags on anything they can catch that moves, right? So here's an albatross. This is a sea lion. It's a shark. There's a tuna, leatherback turtle, and my favorite is the poor elephant seal, all dressed up for Halloween there, with a satellite tag glued onto its head. And so they actually stay on, and when they come back, they take them off. This glue lasts until they molt. But through radio telemetry, they can know the position, they can learn about oceanography, behavior, life history, population abundance. These tags are incredible. And here's what they show when you look at these guilds, right? A guild is an assemblage of animals that function and feed in a similar way. So the tuna, right? These are the tuna. Here's the west coast of North America, California current, right? And they're going back and forth to Hawaii, to Japan and back, right? These seals and sea lions, right? They're going all over, right? But not all over the entire Pacific. There's this area called the transition zone, and then there's this area off the Aleutians. And the really big males, right, that you see on the beaches, they go up here. And the young males and the females go here. And then some of these that are going south are sea lions. These are sharks, right? Salmon sharks and white sharks. The only two species they've been tagging, right? The salmon sharks come out of Alaska and come down to Central California. The white sharks are throughout Central California, and they go out to this place that they just called the cafe. The White Shark Cafe. And they don't even know what the hell they're doing out there. But they go out there, and they sometimes will go out to the Hawaiian Islands as well. Right? The birds, the albatross, and the shearwater come. This is now a bigger part of the Pacific. These are the New Zealand down here. Right? And I'll show you, this is an amazing story. But the areas that they are found in also with their tags include the Aleutian Islands and the West Coast. Leatherback turtles, as I mentioned. The ones that are found in the beaches of Nicaragua go south. The ones in Indonesia go over to Central California. Right? And they go there, as do the whales, and all these things, right, they're all going there for food. Right? That is the restaurant. That's the food court of the animal world. This is their mall, and that's where they go to eat. Right? And they're all going there to feed. And they're going there to feed because it's reliably productive, and there's a tremendous amount of food. And so that's in a broad sense. I just wanted to put a little more detail on one, the sooty shearwater. And there's a Scott Schaefer who's at San Jose State, tags these guys. And these are some of the most amazing bird stories ever, right? And so these sooty shearwaters, they're catching them and they're tagging them down in New Zealand. And these different color patterns show different times of the year. And so the blue is when they're foraging while they're rearing their chicks, right? And then what the adults do is they take off and they fly east to pick up the trade winds over near South America. Some don't get that far. They start going back to the west. And then they fly this zigzag pattern back off Japan, Kamchatka, the Aleutians, and you can see this enormous aggregation off Central California and broader California, and then they fly back. And the really cool thing is they come back to the same burrow, right, that they bred in. The males and the females will breed together, and if nothing happens to the two, they'll come back to the same burrow. And the other cool thing, maybe all the married couples, including myself, might think this is a good idea. He might go here, she might go there. Sometimes they go to the same place, but it's really kind of equal proportion. And then they come back, they find each other, they go back to the same burrow, and they have another chick. And they take off while the chicks are still on, doing what chicks do, teenagers. Oh, what do I do next? And they got to figure out on their own how to go east and then west. 60,000-mile migration. That is a long way to fly to eat. But you do that because you know you're going to find food. Right? And that's why you can find these guys in the summer because it's winter down here. Right? So they leave there because the food disappears there, and they come up to California and the Bering Sea, and they feed. So when you aggregate all that data, the Central California coast is the heart and soul of all of these tagged predators. This is 9 years worth of data, and when you aggregate all of those species, they're all concentrating on this area, the Serengeti of the sea. Whale watching has exploded. It's been popular for a very long time, but you guys, I imagine I know many in this room have been over to the Monterey Bay to see whales. These were humpback whales from 2 years ago, right off the boardwalk, right? Seabirds, kayakers. It's crazy. It made it in the New York Times, which the whale watch companies say was immensely important to expand the popularity of this activity. In 2013, the Santa Cruz Sentinel called it 2013 the year of the whale. And I'm telling you, you should have been there last year. It was even crazier. We had humpback whales absolutely everywhere. And it's just becoming a very, very popular thing on an international level. So to summarize the Serengeti of the Sea, blue whales June to September, humpbacks March to November, and this seems to increase. In some ways, they're almost year-round now, the humpbacks. Gray whales and orcas feeding on the gray whales is now almost a regular activity in May, where the orcas will separate the mom with the young calves that are swimming north, and they'll kill and feed the calf on the calf. Elephant seals peak from December to March, but they come back again in the summer, and they are really boring in the summer, but they're really pretty cool this time of year. Seabirds, dolphins, sea otters. You can see that from a year-round basis, for those that have been to the Serengeti, right, one of the things about the Serengeti, once you get there, is it's very easy to see the wildlife. And that's why this place is like no other in terms of marine wildlife. They're easy to see. You could take a 4-hour boat trip. You could certainly see blue whales many places in the world, but you're talking about a day or two, or certainly 8 hours on a boat. When they're around, it's 4 hours in and out in Monterey. Okay, so I'm going to move quickly here. So what can you do? People always ask me, well, what can we do? And so I thought, here's a couple things that you guys can think about doing. We can all get serious about reducing our carbon footprint. Now, I didn't ride a horse from Monterey today, so I threw some emissions out there. We're all learning how to conserve water, though, and that's really important in a salmon-important area like San Joaquin River. You can buy sustainable seafood, right? And even local organic vegetables, local grass-fed beef. You can get politically active, and you could support an ocean cause like new marine sanctuaries. And we've opened up a process that would allow for new sanctuaries to be designated. This is when all the sanctuaries were designated. Then you can see there's about a 15-year period of nothing. But what we've found in that period of time is community after community adjacent to existing sanctuaries said, please expand, I want some of the benefits. In Florida Keys, Monterey Bay, Gulf of the Farallones, Cordell, Thunder Bay, American Samoa. And that is a testament, in my mind, these are not our choices, these are local communities saying, expand the boundaries, we want more marine sanctuaries. And there's a limit as to how far we can go for those, but these are communities that have petitioned the federal government to reopen the process, just on the West Coast, from people down in San Luis Obispo, Northern California, Oregon, some Alaskans were looking for an opportunity. And so the government's reopened that process where communities can submit their nominations for why they think their stretch of coast ought to become a marine sanctuary. We've got 11 criteria. The primary one is that we're looking for areas that have community-based support, where the community in that area has said, we want to see this area designated. And there's 2 we've received on the West Coast so far. One was all of the Aleutian Islands, which is frankly too big of an area to propose, but it had some weaknesses, and we've given them some comments, and we're reviewing one that's called the Chumash Heritage Sanctuary for the San Luis Obispo County coast. And I'll stop with this last slide, because I did tell Bill I would at least help lay out how I think you guys are connected, right? And you're obviously connected through the weather, but that's a pretty meager thing, right? I mean, I don't do anything to help you with the weather. But you are connected. Your weather comes off the ocean. But I'll bet people in this room eat fish. And they like to go catch fish in the ocean. You remember that slide I showed you before? If you're going to the Pacific and you're catching fish out of Monterey, Moss Landing, any of the San Francisco ports, Bodega Bay, you're fishing in a national marine sanctuary. If you go to the beach and you just drive west to go do it, if you go kayaking, if you go scuba diving, if you do an ocean triathlon, there out on the coast, you're doing that in a national marine sanctuary. Your plastics, your trash, your urban runoff, you may not think about this, right? But the things in your storm drains that end up in your creeks and in the San Joaquin River, eventually, within a matter of months, are out in a national marine sanctuary. And you're not alone. We got that problem throughout, but anything you can do to help on that, we will appreciate it 4 months into the future. And then the last thing to leave you with is to really, I hope, provide you some inspiration. If you haven't yet, get out to the coast and do some marine wildlife watching, because it really is the best in the world. And you will see things, you know, if you time it right, if you make some plans that you've never seen before, never thought you might see in the past. So I encourage you to get out and see your Serengeti of the Sea. And with that, thank you very much.